Hi there, and welcome to the Online Ocean Symposium. On this episode called Changing Ocean Chemistry, we'll be covering ocean acidification and declining oxygen levels. In this specific hangout, we'll also be speaking with those that bring science into decision-making, to mitigating and managing these threats posed by changing ocean chemistry. My guests today include Francis Chan of the Oregon State University, Emily Knight of the Ocean Science Trust, Lisa Suatoni, I'm going to totally destroy that, of the National Resource Defense Council, and Julia Robertson of the Ocean Conservancy, James Beck of SunBurst Sensors, and Kathleen Corbett of the Coastal Estuary Research Federation. As you can tell, we have a very big panel of very awesome, very cool people who know what they're talking about. But I want to remind you at home that you can ask questions of our panel using the Google Hangout Q&A button. So let's just kind of jump into it. My first guest is Francis Chan, assistant professor and senior researcher at Oregon State University. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Andrew.
No problem. So first of all, let's just do the quick basic. What is ocean acidification and what is hypoxia in like a sentence or less?
Okay, well, there are both aspects of changing ocean chemistry. And on the OA side, ocean acidification, it's a CO2 problem. We add CO2 to seawater, it changes chemistry, and it changes chemistry in ways that a lot of marine life that we care about don't like. And hypoxia, it's kind of a $5 word for not having enough oxygen. And we see that lots of places in the ocean don't have enough oxygen, but there are these are places that can be changing and growing because of human activities. And when you can't breathe, you can't live.
Well, what is the actual connection between hypoxia and acidification?
Yeah, I'm going to bring us to, I'm going to be very parochial and bring us to the West Coast.
Okay.
And when I go out to sea and we kind of look across Pacific, and I'm wondering, why is it that I measure, carbon concentrations that are through the roof and oxygen levels that are really super low? And it turns out we actually have an old water problem. So imagine if you take, you walk down to the ocean, you take a jar, you cap it, and you put that jar full of water, and you put it away for about 50 years. And by the time you come back and open that jar, well, a lot of things would have done their living in it. They've died in it, and they've released a lot of carbon dioxide, used a lot of oxygen. And that's exactly what happens in the coastal ocean off the West Coast. The water we get actually has been on a long conveyor belt ride for up to 5 decades. The last time it saw the light of day and actually had a chance to breathe might have been back in the 1970s, if not later, if not earlier. So we have water that's coming at us that's old. It's chock full of carbon dioxide. It's really been drawn down in oxygen. And that gives us the wrong head start because now we have high CO2 water, so that whatever extra that we get from, for example, from me driving to work today and burning a couple gallons of gas, well, that CO2 is going to be adding on top of a very high baseline level. And one of the things to note is that when you come out to the Oregon coast, you go salmon fishing, right? You go crab fishing. We have an amazingly productive ocean, and that's sometimes that can be too much of a good thing, because as that water makes its way across the Pacific and starts to lap onto our coast, we have just incredibly productive waters that can add they can take another cut and give you even more CO2 and draw down your oxygen even further. So kind of that's in a nutshell. We're kind of set up to be one of the earliest and most hard-hit ecosystems out there.
So what are the actual impacts that are being observed along the West Coast from this phenomenon? We've heard about losses at oyster hatcheries in the Pacific Northwest in recent years. what about like crustaceans and wild-caught fisheries? Like, what are those impacts from both hypoxia and acidification?
Okay. Well, this is where we're kind of getting to the edge of where the science is able to give us really confident answers. But what we're seeing is that, I kind of take a step back and think about this. If we were going to have this conversation, let's say 5 years ago, we would think, well, maybe these oysters they're just kind of hothouse flowers, right? They don't really belong in the Pacific Northwest. They're imported. They're exotic organisms. They're imported from Japan way back when, and they can't make it here. They're just not tough enough for the Pacific Northwest. And maybe that's really the last thing that's going to be impacted, so that the worst effects of OA is behind us, and we don't have to worry about what's happening in our native ecosystem. Well, it turns out that's really the first thing that's impacted, because when we look at the science, and it's a kind of a rapidly accumulating body of research, we're seeing that more and more species that we didn't do tests on before, more and more we find out that they are actually quite sensitive to ocean acidification. And it's a real mixed bag, because I work on things like coral and algae. So we go out to the coast, there's a carpet of pink out there. Those are coral and algae. They can be kind of boring, but it turns out they're one of these organisms that is a great home, great nursery for all the other things that we like to see along the coast. Now, the questions about the fisheries, we're not there yet, and I really, this is something that I know lots of people are pouring their energies into, because these are the things that people care about, and as science, we should be able to provide those answers. So, but stay tuned, and hold our feet to the fire on that one.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely stay tuned. Know that that's a multi-million to $1 billion industry, and with the impacts like hypoxia and ocean acidification, that's going to be possibly very detrimental, and I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit later. You are currently co-chair of the West Coast Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Science Panel.
Right.
It's charged, if I'm correct in this, with informing marine and coastal decision makers about hypoxia and ocean acidification, including fish and wildlife, water quality, policymakers. Can you let us know and the audience know what are some of the key messages coming out of your panel's work?
Yeah, of course, and I think that I actually like to start and talk about who are these key messages for. And this is a unique opportunity, because these are key messages for policymakers, decision makers to actually talk about themselves. So we're not trying to arm a lot of scientists with ways to talk about the science behind it. We're trying to arm people that need to make a call on whether to prioritize action, how they would consider this problem. And right off the bat, and it'll be pretty glib, pretty coarse scale. But right off the bat, this is a global carbon problem. I think we have to confront this head on. This is something that is a result of human activities. And when you zoom down to specific regions, now I say it from the U.S. West Coast, but I know other places that can also say this, is that kind of the ecosystem, the stuff that structures an ecosystem can make it even more vulnerable. It can amplify the global impacts of OA. So now I've just told you that it's a global problem, and not only that, some places are going to be naturally worse off. But what's important is that there are things that we can and we should do now, and so we need to think about the kinds of strategies. And overall, it's about reducing the stressors where we can. It's about enhancing ecosystem resilience, so that things are likely to be more able to withstand these impacts. And lastly, we need to work hard on the kinds of solutions that we can employ. Now, one of the messages, of course, is that we actually need to do better science. And this is terrible, right? Because scientists always say we need more science, and this is, it gets boring because it's kind of self-serving. We should have more research to do what we do. But the end point is that I think we just need to be smarter in a lot of ways. For example, we need to use models in a much smarter way, because even though I've talked about this being a global problem, and there's some local things that we can do, we don't know what they are. And we don't want to start throwing the same tools everywhere. For example, we don't want to be just talking about land use controls if those things don't really matter much. We want to know, where things are changing, how they're changing, how fast, what places are vulnerable. So we need to monitor smarter, and that means that we need to think about what we do in the ocean, and let's align. And Jim is going to talk about the technologies. So we need to think about how we can get better information that are useful in the near future. So it's self-serving, but we need to arm society with the smartest tools out there.
Couldn't agree with you more, and we will definitely be getting to Jim and his awesome advancement in the science. I want to thank you for being a part, and I'm going to go on to our next guest. Next up, it's my pleasure to welcome the Senior Program Manager for California Ocean Science Trust, Emily Knight. Welcome to the program, Emily.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being a part of this, and thanks for all the work that you guys are doing over there. You actually are working closely with the West Coast Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Science Panel to develop informational resources for decision makers, taking it to the next step. What resources can we look forward to over the coming months?
Sure, and I would just like to start by acknowledging the panel, which includes experts from California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. So it's a West Coast-wide collaboration of interdisciplinary scientists thinking about the problem of changing ocean chemistry. And I have worked with the panel for the last close to 3 years now as they've developed their work, and it's their dedication to wanting to inform decision makers, being willing to give their time to develop a whole suite of products. So I want to say that first and foremost, that the reason this is possible is because of the commitment of the scientific community to care about this issue and want to work with decision makers on how to solve it. And that's been incredibly gratifying to me. And so the products that they have coming out, they've already released a series of products, and they will be having more come out through early 2016, including an executive summary that sits on top of everything and summarizes their key messages. So as Francis alluded to, what we're dealing with here is essentially a multiple stressor problem of changing ocean chemistry. And so the way that we worked with the panel to scope all of those resources is we went to the decision makers who would use them, like fisheries managers, water quality managers, air quality managers, land use, and at the state, the regional, and the federal level had conversations with them about what are the kinds of things that would slot into different management processes, and scoped the products from there. So from the very beginning, we had a sort of science to decision-making pathway put in place that created just two-way communication between the panel and the decision makers about what they needed. So if you go to the panel's website, westcoastoah.org, and look at the products page, you'll see a series of products scoped to all of those different needs, addressing everything from synthesizing the science on key topics such as impacts to physiology or impacts to ecosystems, all the way to very high-level kind of science to policy products where they actually lay out a vision for how the scientific community can work better with decision makers. And that's really the key, is that the products in and of themselves are valuable information sources, but it's really the fact that those products serve as venues for continued conversation and collaboration and problem solving going forward. And so as the panel wraps up its work in early 2016, the beauty of this is we now have a network of scientists across the West Coast who stand ready to figure out what the policy and management responses look like beyond just the information resources. So they come out, the products come out on a rolling basis when they're ready, and they address topics that span the different jurisdictions. I think the way that we like to say it is that the panel has informed us that this is a multiple stressor issue, and a multiple stressor issue therefore requires multiple management and policy responses.
I think that's a really important message to be passing around. How should and how can decision makers prioritize this issue along with the other threats that are currently facing our ocean, including things like drought, sea level rise, and rising temperatures? Why now on ocean acidification?
Well, the way that I actually don't necessarily divorce this issue from any of those other things. What you're talking about is managing in a changing environment. And so this is about going to fishery decision makers and water quality managers and saying, you are an OAH manager too. Land use managers are an OAH manager. High-level policy makers are OAH managers, because this impacts everything. And so the improved decision-making that comes out on the other end is just going to arm us to do better by all of those different issues, because you're talking about something that touches really on every aspect of the ecosystem. Gotcha.
So what you guys are doing at the panel is very, very interesting, and it's very important as well. How can the viewers at home and anybody, anywhere, learn more about the panel's work and get involved?
Go to the website. Like I said, westcoastoah.org. You can sign up for a newsletter, and all of our contact information is there. You can also see who all of the different panelists are, and everything is right there.
Awesome. Well, I want to remind those watching at home that we will be posting links to more information on all of these issues and for each of the groups and panelists that are here so that you can get more information. I also want to remind you that you can be asking us questions right now through the Q&A button on the Google Hangout window. Next up, I'd like to bring aboard the senior scientist for the National Resource Defense Council's Ocean Program, Lisa Suatoni. Did I get it right that time?
Everyone in my family says that name differently. So, but well, I often say Suatoni.
Suatoni. All right, Lisa Suatoni. So sorry. Anyway, so you're with the National Resource Defense Council, and you are working on this issue. Can you tell us just a little bit about the background on that, and just as a little introduction to the work that you're doing?
Sure. So NRDC has been working on ocean acidification for probably the past 7 years, trying to do a number of things: raise awareness, advocate for important science funding, and integrate ocean acidification into climate policy to make sure that when policy around climate change is crafted, that the oceans aren't left out of that equation.
Gotcha. So specifically in regards to the physical impact, the oyster industry of the Pacific Northwest has already lost an estimated $110 million due to acidification. The next big question is, who's next? You were a co-author of a recent study in Nature Climate Change that looks at who in the U.S. will be most harmed by ocean acidification. What were the findings of that paper?
So we conducted a socioeconomic vulnerability assessment for ocean acidification on the shelled mollusk industry of the United States. So this was a fairly narrow look at vulnerability to ocean acidification, and we viewed it more as a first stab at the question. What our synthesis shows is really the relative risk of communities that harvest shelled mollusks for ocean acidification should we do nothing about this problem or this threat. And I'm going to share a visual aid here. Let me know when you guys can see it. Sorry.
It's all good.
Okay, so this is a figure of...
We can't currently see it. Make sure that you're clicking on the share screen.
Sure, hold on.
It's all good.
There we go.
Ah,
Can you see it?
yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a figure from a paper that was published in Nature Climate Change, and it shows kind of the broad scope of vulnerability for shelled mollusk fisheries in the U.S. I would say first we found that there are pockets of vulnerability scattered all around our country. And the high vulnerability here, high social vulnerability here, is shown by the color red. And high vulnerability from an oceanographic perspective is shown with the dark shades of black and gray, and the presence of local risk factors. Secondly, we see that vulnerability is really unique from place to place, so that taking action to reduce vulnerability would require a tailored approach or plan. So although this is a global problem, we really need to address it on the local level as well. As you guys look at the map, you'll see that there are red areas and dark orange areas scattered around. I'd like to point out that social vulnerability here can be determined by either economic dependence, high economic dependence on shelled mollusks, or it can be determined by a low capacity to adapt to the loss of shelled mollusks or changes. So you can see areas in our study that showed high social vulnerability are places like Massachusetts, parts of Virginia, and the Carolinas, down in Louisiana. There are areas that one would not have predicted that we should be targeting research or attention. I'd also like to point out, however, you mentioned that the Pacific Northwest has already had a crisis in their shellfish industry with the loss of baby oysters. And this is showing low social vulnerability in our study, but that's because of the very high adaptive capacity that this region has. This is not to say that it's not at risk. As we all know, it's already been hit, and that risk comes from the high risk in the oceanographic realm as well as this vulnerable economic resource. So you can see the waters offshore here are dark black, and that has a lot to do with the high enriched CO2 that Dr. Chan was talking about. And there are numerous local risk factors, including upwelling, river water that is low in carbonate saturation, and eutrophic estuaries.
Interesting. So you've touched on this a little bit, that it's both a global issue but also has local factors. What can communities at risk actually do to adapt? Does it have to be a tailor-made answer, or is there more of a cookie-cutter approach? What can local communities do?
So, as I mentioned before, we found that the nature of vulnerability was very place-dependent, and that the vulnerability profile varied very much. Here's just two examples how the Pacific Northwest is vulnerable because of its northern latitude and cold waters in old, high CO2 rich waters that have dominant upwelling system that's bringing deep, cold, rich CO2 water up to the surface, and has a number of rivers with low carbonate. So its challenges are a very different nature than, for example, in the Chesapeake Bay, which is vulnerable because of eutrophication primarily, because of cultural eutrophication and algae blooms. Or it's vulnerable because it has low commercial shellfish diversity. It has river water input of really, really low carbonate water. So each area is going to need to take a look at its challenges and its assets and craft a specific adaptation plan. And the Pacific Northwest has already had a successful adaptation story, in part because it has a high level of aquaculture going on and seed production that's removed from the wild environment, where the production of larval oysters can be highly controlled and manipulated. So we've seen with active state government and partnerships with local scientists that the aquaculture industry there has gotten a good handle on the problem so far, where they're beginning to monitor the water that they're bringing into the hatcheries, and at times even conditioning the water so that it's rich in carbonate and beneficial to the baby or larval oysters. And you're going to see a different adaptation story in the Chesapeake Bay where they're facing eutrophication, and they may want to target the local water pollution or local sources of nutrient pollution to reduce their vulnerability.
Gotcha. So if somebody wanted to find this detailed report or find out more about the findings or find out what specifically they can or should be doing in their local area, where would that be housed? Where would I be able to find that?
So NRDC has a website, and the URL is here. You could also just Google NRDC Ocean Acidification Hotspots. And that's an area where you can find the report, where you can find the study, but you can also go to an interactive map where you can zoom in on your area of interest and look at what the nature of vulnerability is where you live. What are the physical characteristics? Like here, I'm showing rivers and the level of eutrophication in an estuary. Or what are the social dimensions of vulnerability in your area? Are you have a ton of jobs in shelled mollusk fisheries, or you're making a lot of money, or you have little money for scientific research, etc. We have all the dimensions of the study in this at this website. You can play around with it.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to have to take a look at it, and I asked the people at home to also take a look at it. Very interesting information and very on point on how it's not just a global issue, but it also has local factors that come into account. I'm going to move on to our next guest, who is the Ocean Acidification Program Director at the Ocean Conservancy, Julia Robertson. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you.
No, thank you for being here. So, most people are familiar with the Ocean Conservancy, hopefully. Can you talk a little bit about what your role is and what they do in regards to ocean acidification?
Sure. So the Ocean Acidification Program at Ocean Conservancy has been going for about 4 years now. And really, to boil it down, our work is about building champions for ocean acidification action and engagement and awareness. And that's at the decision maker level in Congress. It's working with partners in some of the states that are impacted by ocean acidification. It's working with scientists who are doing phenomenal work on ocean acidification research and seeing if we can make some connections between what the scientists are doing, decision makers, and industries that may be impacted by acidification. So building champions at every level in a way that can engage people and also ensure that there's support for action to mitigate and adapt to this problem.
That, champions are awesome. We all want to have more champions. We all know that cutting carbon dioxide emissions is still the ideal solution to ocean acidification, but that will honestly take time and effort to implement. What are some additional actions for state and regional decision makers and resource managers and champions that could help address some aspects of ocean acidification?
Sure, so that's a great question, and I know a few of the panelists have touched on it. I mean, like you said, to really truly solve ocean acidification, we have to reduce carbon pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere. We all know the heavy lift that is, and sometimes that can seem really unachievable, to be totally honest. And so what Ocean Conservancy and many of the other partners that we work with have really tried to break down into meaningful, actionable efforts that states and places and regions that are impacted by ocean acidification can actually take. And we have such phenomenal examples of success. Francis and Lisa have already talked about the successful example of Washington State and Oregon, where ocean acidification was identified as a problem for the very important shellfish industry. Funding was put towards that industry for research and monitoring, and they were able to adapt and ultimately protect their businesses. And then as a result of that, the Washington State Blue Ribbon Panel came out with their recommendations in 2012, and I think they had something like 42 recommended actions that they were going to explore as a state that, quite frankly, I think has been a blueprint for other states to take, to show that they can do things, states can do take action on acidification in the absence of this bigger, carbon pollution ramp down. So we have, Maine that has convened a panel, released their recommendations. They're putting in place those recommendations. Maryland has done the same thing. We have other states putting forward legislation, and a lot of these state-based panels and regional efforts are looking at, where do we need to invest research dollars on particularly vulnerable species? What can we do to ramp down coastal pollution that make acidification and hypoxia worse? How can we raise awareness of this issue amongst coastal managers, resource managers, and with the industries that might be impacted?
So within that specifically, just as a follow-up question, if, say, I was a general person who was worried about this issue and I wanted to, move my local legislator, state legislator, federal representative towards one of these actions, where would I send him or her?
That's a great question. So Ocean Conservancy has worked with a lot of our supporters. We have only over 150,000 members that we, asked to take action. We have encouraged our members in some of these states to thank their legislators when they're taking action on acidification, when they're making it a priority, or we are encouraging them to, decision makers, to pay attention to this issue. So if you're an ocean or coastal lover, and you want to do something about this issue, I think, educating yourself, learning more, and signing up for Ocean Conservancy's email list or following us on Facebook, where we try to share a lot of this real-time information so people can take action. Because everybody wants to be able to do something. Nobody wants to feel helpless.
I also think that you guys have touched upon something really big. Everybody wants to be recognized and at least thanked for their efforts. So, thanking somebody for being a champion on that is, I think, also a really good move as well.
We love thank yous.
Yeah. So your work with the oyster industry has elevated ocean acidification in front of high-level policymakers in Washington, D.C. What measures are resonating there? How do you get people to care and act on this issue on that level? Sure.
So, I think it really does underscore, if you're going to take this issue to a decision maker, if you're going to bring people to Capitol Hill to talk to decision makers about this issue, what we have found, what Ocean Conservancy and our partners have found, is that really this is about coastal communities, livelihoods, jobs, businesses, and we've developed materials that showcase that messaging. Decision makers are just like anyone else. They want to be able to take action, and so our role and our job is to make ocean acidification locally relevant to their constituencies and politically potent, something that they can't ignore. And so we have developed, I'm a little scared to share my screen because I can't see where the little oh wait, I found it. Okay, hang on. I'm going to try to show you something that we have developed for some of our efforts. And so this is an example of an infographic that we developed around Florida and potential support from Florida legislators on ocean acidification research and funding in the region. So we focus on jobs, we focus on business impacts, focus on the communities that could be impacted by this issue.
Interesting. So of course we're going to be putting out information and links to all that. One last question before I move on to our next guest. If you wanted to have every legislative representative on every level know at least one thing about ocean acidification, what would that be?
Ooh, good question. I think that ocean acidification, if I wanted, legislators to know one thing about this, I would say that it's not an ocean issue, it's a people issue. If you care about coastal communities, if you care about the people that depend on a healthy ocean, then you should care about ocean acidification.
Excellent. I will try to push that around as much as possible. Before I move on to my next guest, I want to just give a little bit of background. One reason why ocean acidification went largely unnoticed for years is because it's very difficult to measure. My next guest is the co-founder of SunBurst Systems, a company out of Missoula, Montana, who recently won the XPrize's Ocean Acidification Challenge. Welcome to the Hangout, Jim Beck. Yep. Sorry, you are currently... There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, can hear you totally. Are you currently broadcasting from Montana?
Yeah, I'm in Montana right now.
Surrounded by all that ocean?
Yep. We're honorary West Coasters here in Montana.
So, tell me a little bit about how you guys got into the whole sensor, especially ocean sensor industry, being in Missoula, Montana.
Well, the founder of SunBurst Sensors, Professor Mike DeGremper at the University of Montana, developed a CO2 sensor at Woods Hole in the mid-90s. And he did that as a postdoc, came back to Montana, became a professor, and was contacted by a number of people saying, we'd like to buy that sensor and use it. So he said, well, I guess I better form a company. That's how it happened to be here in Montana. Mike and I are both native Montanans. We actually went to high school together. And my coming to SunBurst Sensors was based on my own desire to come back to Montana, coming from Seattle back to Montana to study the ocean, of all things. And I had been talking to Mike at our high school class reunion, and we wrote some grant proposals, and next thing you know.
Fantastic. So, as I mentioned, the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Health XPrize actually had two grand challenges when it came to the acidification. There was the durability and the affordability challenge. The durability was more of like a accuracy and durability.
So it was accuracy and affordability were the two purses.
Which you won both of.
Yeah, we did. We had two separate entries, but they're both based on technology that we were already producing. Since about 2008, we've been making the SAMI PH, which SAMI stands for Submersible Autonomous Moored Instrument. We're not terribly clever with naming, but so we took that existing product and we modified it. In the accuracy purse, the challenge was really to be able to go relatively fast because they were doing some high-speed sampling for us, what's considered high-speed sampling once a minute, and going to a depth of 3,000 meters. So to accomplish that, what we really needed to do was do a little bit of jiggering with the software and then create a titanium housing to handle the depth. However, we weren't able to actually test that housing until we were out on the ocean. So it was with some relief that it came up working each time. The other challenge, the affordability purse, was much more challenging in that you needed to make a sensor for less than $1,000, or at least less, $1,000 in parts and labor. So right off the bat, we have in our other device, we have a pump that costs over $500. So so that had to go, and we had to do a bunch of work with the optics and consolidate a bunch of things, and we came up with what we call the iSAMI, and no, Apple hasn't come calling yet. This is just a prototype at this time, but it's meant just for shallow usage. It only goes down to about 5 meters, by the reason is that we put the pump inside the pressure housing, and that just simplifies a lot of things for us. But there's a lot of people who are really interested in what's happening in the first few meters, and we'd already actually been working on this problem with some work funded by NOAA SBIR program, trying to develop a less expensive disposable type sensor for the Global Drifter program. So we were already kind of underway when the XPrize came along, and that I guess gave us a bit of a leg up in terms of design and so on. And I'll try to do this screen share. Give this a no, maybe I won't. Well, it worked earlier, but now it's no longer visible. Anyway, the end point of this device is that we'll be shrinking it to about 1/6 the size seen here, and I had a picture of that, but I can't seem to share it with you. So I'll just wave my hands. You know, a little bigger than like a Foster's can, let's say, with and then some reagent attached to that.
So, you know, as you just mentioned, not only are you not satisfied with the size and the affordability of the current model that won, you're going smaller, and I'm guessing hopefully more affordable as well. On all that, like, engineers and scientists all over the world will now have access to these newly affordable, accurate ocean pH sensors. Can you explain for a layperson how these sensors work and how they really differ from what has been used previously?
Right. So, I mean, like I said, we have been doing this for a while, so I guess we're, like, to my knowledge, one of the only companies producing a reagent-based pH system. And the way that works, very simply, is that we have a dye, like litmus paper, that changes color with pH. Our dye changes over a much narrower pH range that's you're going to see in the ocean, from around 7 to 9. And we basically just shine light through that reagent as we're pumping it through some small tubing. And by looking at the color, more or less, we can determine what the pH is just by knowing the characteristics of that dye or reagent.
So since winning the XPrize challenges, have you already started working with, say, universities or researchers on ocean acidification with your sensors? Like, what's the next steps for you?
Well, as I said, you know, our sensors, the SAMI pH is already being used fairly extensively. It's used by the Ocean Observatory Initiative, used by researchers around the globe. But what the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Health XPrize has done is, you know, just give us more visibility. It's, you know, we're a very small company. We're less than 10 employees, 9 at the moment, and you know, this put a big spotlight on us, and we're getting contact from researchers in other areas, you know, especially like marine biology and so on, who want, let's say, you know, some good pH data, but they don't have the wherewithal maybe to buy the more expensive SAMI pH. So it's part of our job over the next, say, 6 months is to try to take this and turn it into a real product that we can get out to market.
So if I wanted to, say, buy one of those, I have to wait. Are you guys going to have like a Kickstarter or pre-order or anything like that?
No, we won't be doing a Kickstarter, but right now we've just got a few question marks to finalize. I mean, we've got the design pretty much nailed down, but we just want to make sure that a few things are working as well as we'd hoped. In shrinking it down, we had to change a few things from this design. So we're just verifying that it actually works as well as this worked, which was surprisingly well. So once that's nailed down, then it's basically just getting the parts made, getting the drawings out, etc. That all takes a little bit of time.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely make sure to let certain people know, like Francis, who asked a question of where he could buy one when they're available. On a larger scheme of things, on like a big picture for this, what are your thoughts of utilizing your tools and other tools like them for a global ocean acidification monitoring network?
Right, so some of that's underway already. I mentioned the Ocean Observatory Initiative. They're doing all kinds of ocean science, including CO2 and pH, and just about everything else you can think of. I was just at the Oceans 15 conference in Washington, D.C., and took a look at the Oceans Network Canada, and they're doing some great work, some really interesting stuff. If you dig up their website, you can look at all their different sensors in real time, including salmon pH.
Excellent.
So there's a lot of stuff going on there. We're hoping to get ours out on the, as I mentioned, the Global Drifter program. We're trying to get some deployed on that so that we're going to get data from places that are not being monitored right now. So I think there's a lot going on, and it's, I think that the XPrize served a real valuable purpose in just, like I said, calling attention to a big problem.
Most definitely. Well, I want to thank you for joining us on this hangout. We're going to come back around with questions from the audience and more of a group discussion as well. I wanted to introduce my final guest, Kathleen Corbett, a scientific program co-chair for the Coastal and Estuary Research Foundation conference that will actually be happening November 8th through the 12th in Portland. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks.
Well, welcome to the hangout.
Thank you.
So, what is this conference all about? What are you trying to do with this conference, and who's going? Give us the skinny.
Yeah, it's the 23rd Biennial Coastal and Estuarine Research Federation Conference. The theme of this conference is Grand Challenges in Coastal and Estuarine Science, Securing Our Future. Again, it's November 8th through 12th in Portland, Oregon, like you said. It's at the Conference Center. And it's recognized as one of the premier conferences on the science and management of coastal and estuarine ecosystems. So it brings together the best and the brightest in the coastal science community to discuss emerging threats along with some of the things that we already know more about, and then innovative solutions for tackling them. So it has, we expect about 1,500 folks or participants from around the world. I think 27 countries will be represented. And we have about 1,500 presentations, about almost 1,000 oral, and then 500 poster presentations over 4 days, 2 plenary sessions, some workshops, field site visits, and then social networking events. So, and this conference has almost 2.5 days back-to-back presentations focusing solely on ocean acidification and synergistic effects of hypoxia. So it's an exciting event if you want to know more about ocean acidification, want to learn more about it, and then meet other folks that are working on it from around the globe. I would highly recommend participating.
Excellent. I know that a lot of the panelists on this discussion are actually going to be participating in that as well. You mentioned a little bit about like social networking events and other stuff. What's the best way for someone at home who's not necessarily going to be able to fly up there to participate and get info on it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether the website or any of the presentations will be online or accessible online. I don't think we're that into, or we have not been able to figure out how to do that just yet.
Well,
so
we should.
The best way to participate is to show up.
Try to get that. Help you get that all sorted out so that people all over the place can participate and keep tabs on what's going on. So, can you tell us what you hope will come out of this conference?
Well, we have, I guess, 2.5 days of presentations, and at the first day, so I should take a step back. 2 years ago in our San Diego conference, another Coastal and Estuarine Research Federation, we had, I think, pretty much back-to-back 4 days of discussions of ocean acidification and what's known to date. And we had a plenary by Dr. Richard Feely, and it just generated a lot of energy on ocean acidification. And I think the science community wanted to follow up on that. So that's why the Science Program Committee had another focus on this in this conference to follow up on that. So we have sessions that are going to talk about, you know, what's been learned since that last conference, more recent results, and then kind of broader overviews. And then we're going to start winnowing down over the couple of days to specific topics. So some of the complexities of measuring ocean acidification and, like, you know, like productive areas like seagrass bottoms and how difficult it is to try to assess ocean acidification in those areas. And then maybe those kinds of habitats might actually mitigate some of the effects of ocean acidification. Other things like the synergistic effects of hypoxia and eutrophication, which I think we've been talking about a little bit. We have some focus on modeling and predictive tools to inform management and policy, and then I think we actually have a section that's specifically geared towards connecting the science and politicians and managers, and I think we're going to have somebody, Representative Gabriella Goldfarb from the Oregon Governor's Office, presenting in that last one. So I think it's very exciting.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely have to keep tabs on what's going on with that. You know, in regards to, you know, the difference between the last conference you had and this conference, now, where do you see it going when it comes to, you know, actionable, you know, actionable solutions or actionable initiatives that would come out of something like this? Have you seen any evidence of, you know, networks of scientists getting together and putting together papers or proposals, or actually reaching out to their local elected officials through these sorts of networking events? You know, what is the ROI of an event like this?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that is one of the intents of a conference like this, is that it also provides a network for scientists from different areas to get together and talk about who's doing what and collaborate more on projects. I should mention we're also having a 2-hour town hall meeting, if you will, that NOAA's putting together. And the idea with that is to bring folks that are researching ocean acidification throughout the U.S. It's focusing on the U.S., but different regions, and it's talking about who's doing what. It's compiling the idea, or the objective of this is to compile who's doing what where and try to figure out where the research gaps are. And so that's, and this is NOAA is putting this together. So the idea there is to try to fill those research gaps in the future.
Oh, interesting. You know, we are actually coming up on kind of the end point of this hangout at the hour mark. So I want to give you the opportunity of, you know, based off of what we've already discussed in this panel and what you've mentioned about the conference coming up, you know, where do you see as like the conjoining part of taking this discussion to that conference and you know, bolstering it to a larger community?
How about, can we open that up to the wider panel?
Yeah, totally.
I'd like to hear what everybody else says.
Want to jump in on that? Just let me know. How about Emily? Let's throw it to you, since I'm feeling in that mood.
Sure. Well, I think our next step, and certainly the CERF conference, has been a really important point for panelists to come together and meet, as well as meet with decision makers. And that happened in 2013, and it'll happen again at the conference in 2015. Some of the panelists will be joining Gabriella to talk about what the panel is doing and what our next steps are. So conferences like that are a really great opportunity to not only brainstorm with decision makers about steps to take, but also begin to share that with others in the scientific community. And for the panel, we are already deeply engaged with the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which is the regional body of policymakers that includes California, Oregon, Gabriella from Oregon, Washington State, and British Columbia. And we are in conversation with NOAA and EPA and others in the federal government to figure out what responses to the panel products look like and what those collaborations look like. So we will be continuing down that path to generate action on the ground.
Jim, I'd actually love to get your perspective on what you would love to see from a conference like this from a technology and instruments side.
Well, actually, we're sending Reggie Spalding, our chief chemist, out to this conference, and she's taking part in something. I can't remember exactly what. But I think these are always valuable because it's a chance for us, if we're there, chance for us just to meet with researchers and policymakers and so on, and just see what their needs are and how we can address them.
That's a really great perspective. I had no idea that you had somebody going to this, so that's awesome to see. Lisa, I'd love to get your perspective, on all this and what things can be brought to a conference, and what you would love to see coming out of a conference like that.
So I think the ocean acidification research and policy arena is fairly small and new. I mean, it's growing every year, which is really exciting. And a conference like this provides the opportunity for close collaboration, which has been kind of a hallmark of this field. The scientists have worked very closely with decision makers and with NGOs, and so I am really looking forward to getting a full pool of people together and get the creative juices flowing for future collaborations.
Excellent.
All hands on deck.
Here's hoping. That's a really great line. I'm sorry that we're not actually going to end on that because I want to throw it over to Francis. Francis, from the university and academic side, can you talk about your perspective on conferences like this?
Well, I think just talking specifically about the CERF conference, it was the first scientific conference that I went to when I was in grad school, and I've always liked it because it's a real mix of both academic scientists but also resource managers. It's almost half and half. So instead of it just being 100% nerd fest, we actually get to interact with people who are trying to make good decisions. And in the world of OA science, it's good to have these checkpoints, right? Like, hey, how are we doing? Are we providing the right kinds of answers? And if we're not, how can we change tack so that by the time we have the next CERF meeting, that we are giving people who need it the right kinds of answers?
Most definitely. Julia, I'm going to throw it to you for the final perspective on this before I kind of wrap things up.
Great. Well, Ocean Conservancy is really excited to attend the CERF conference. We'll be presenting one of the papers that we've developed. It's a toolkit, essentially, of community-level actions to address acidification. And so for me, I'm really excited to hear from others on what's working for them, how they're communicating about acidification, what's worked, what hasn't, so that it can inform our future efforts going forward. So I just think it's a great way to share knowledge across a lot of different disciplines.
I couldn't agree more, except on the fact that anybody who is actually going to CERF, I would really recommend that you get on social media channels such as Facebook, Instagram, and especially Twitter, and share your lessons from what's going on, all the different perspectives of what's going on, and join it all together, aggregate it all with the hashtag CERF 2015. And for those of you at home, pay attention to that hashtag for this upcoming conference, and you'll hear the latest and greatest on ocean acidification and how people are working on measuring it and how people are working on trying to address it. Again, thank you so much to my awesome panel for joining me today, and I want to thank you, the viewers at home, for watching, and until next time, try to go get in the water.